The last 30 years have seen a startling rise in autism spectrum disorders, ADHD, gender dysphoria, and tragic acts of youth violence. These conditions are often viewed as disconnected phenomena explained by better awareness, social shifts, or diagnostic tools. But what if there's something more, something invisible? Emerging evidence shows that microwave radiation, or EMFs, from wireless devices may disrupt biological systems at a fundamental level. From voltage-gated calcium channels to neurotransmitter imbalances and hormonal disruption, science is beginning to reveal how EMFs affect developing brains, hormones, and behavior. If these subtle changes can alter traits like memory, attention, or hormone pathways, we must ask, could they also be eroding empathy itself? Let's look at the facts. Autism spectrum disorder, ASD, calcium ion channels, and disrupted brain signaling. Autism rates have surged from about 1 in 10,000 children in the 1970s to 1 in 36 today. While genetics play a role, researchers like Dr. Martin Pall have uncovered a biological mechanism by which EMFs might contribute to neurodevelopmental disruption, voltage-gated calcium channels, or VGCCs. EMFs activate VGCCs, forcing calcium ions to flood into neurons. This calcium overload triggers oxidative stress, inflammation, and neurotransmitter disruptions, which affect neural pathways. In sensitive developmental windows, this interference can alter how the brain wires itself, impacting social interaction, communication, and sensory processing. Hallmarks of autism. Dr. Paul's findings highlight a critical point. EMFs don't need to heat tissues to disrupt biological processes. If these signals degrade the clarity of brain development, it's entirely plausible that they contribute to autism's meteoric rise. ADHD Yale's study of mice and prenatal microwave exposure. ADHD diagnoses have skyrocketed over the last few decades. Attention spans are shorter, impulsivity higher, and hyperactivity more prevalent. Yale University's landmark study provides a compelling link between microwave radiation and attention deficits. The study pregnant mice exposed to cell phone radiation gave birth to offspring that exhibited severe ADHD-like symptoms. These mice became hyperactive, anxious, and unable to complete basic problem-solving tasks. For instance, when placed in a maze, they struggled to find the cheese, a task normal mice complete with ease. The mechanism researchers identified structural and functional changes in the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for attention, decision-making, and emotional regulation. Disrupted dopamine regulation and neurotransmitter imbalances underlie these behavioral changes. If EMFs can disrupt the brain's wiring to this extent in animals, it raises critical concerns for human prenatal and childhood exposures. Could ADHD in our youth be exacerbated by a constant, invisible noise in their developmental environment? Gender dysphoria, hormonal disruption, and environmental noise. The number of adolescents identifying as transgender or questioning their gender identity has grown significantly. While social acceptance is a critical factor, the potential role of environmental disruptors like EMFs cannot be ignored. Proven hormonal effects of EMFs lowered testosterone levels. Studies have shown that EMFs can reduce testosterone production in males. Testosterone is essential for sexual development, confidence during puberty, and overall gender-related traits. Hormonal pathway disruptions. EMFs interfere with endocrine signaling, including hormones like dihydrotestosterone, or DHT, and estrogen, which guide sexual differentiation and development. Blue light compounds the problem. Constant exposure to blue light from devices further disrupts melatonin production and sleep cycles, exacerbating hormonal imbalances. Blue light exposure has been linked to lowered testosterone levels in males, creating a perfect storm alongside EMF disruption. If the delicate balance of hormones shaping gender identity during critical developmental stages is disrupted by EMFs and artificial light, it raises questions. Could this environmental interference be contributing to the rising prevalence of gender dysphoria? Youth violence and degraded empathy, the silent erosion of emotional stability. Empathy is the foundation of human connection and emotional stability. It resides in the brain's prefrontal cortex, the same region affected in ADHD and disrupted by calcium channel activation. If microwave radiation can impair attention, emotional regulation, and neurotransmitter balance, we must ask, is EMF exposure eroding the trait of empathy? EMF-induced disruptions to neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, and glutamate could degrade emotional regulation and the brain's ability to process social cues. If brain plasticity is altered during critical developmental windows, it may impair the neural pathways that support empathy, impulse control, and moral reasoning. When empathy is reduced, impulsive and aggressive tendencies may increase. Youth already vulnerable to mental health struggles, bullying, or violent media consumption could be tipped further toward instability in a low-fidelity environment saturated with EMFs. The common thread, an environment saturated with microwave radiation. Each of these conditions, autism, ADHD, gender dysphoria, and youth violence, aligns with proven biological effects of EMF exposure, brain signaling disruption via calcium ion channels, neurotransmitter imbalances, altering behavior and cognition, hormonal pathway interference affecting gender traits and development, and oxidative stress degrading cellular integrity and function. If microwave radiation can produce subtle changes in neural plasticity, hormone levels, and bioelectric signaling, it stands to reason that it could also erode more abstract traits like empathy, further destabilizing emotional health. Where do we go from here? The call for research and action. The science is clear. EMFs can disrupt biological processes beyond the thermal effects traditionally considered by regulators. The rise in autism, ADHD, gender dysphoria, and youth violence demands urgent investigation into EMFs as an environmental factor. What needs to happen? Independent research funding is crucial to launch comprehensive studies examining EMF exposure and its role in neurodevelopmental, hormonal, and behavioral changes. Mechanistic exploration is needed to investigate exactly how EMFs disrupt bioelectric signaling, calcium channels, and hormonal systems during critical developmental stages. Regulatory bodies like the FCC must update safety standards to include non-thermal biological effects of EMFs. Until research catches up, we must adopt precautionary measures. Use wired connections over wireless where possible, keep devices away from children's bodies, reduce screen time and blue light exposure, especially at night, and create EMF-free zones in nurseries, schools, and bedrooms. Conclusion: the silent crisis we can no longer ignore. The meteoric rise in autism, ADHD, gender dysphoria, and tragic acts of youth violence is not random. We know microwave radiation can disrupt brain signaling, hormones, and the body's natural bioelectric environment. If these disruptions are contributing to this simultaneous rise in neurodevelopmental instability and behavioral changes, then failing to act is reckless. This is not about eliminating technology. It's about using it responsibly, protecting developing minds, and ensuring that environmental noise doesn't corrupt the critical traits, attention, emotional regulation, and empathy that make us human. The time for research, updated safety standards, and precaution is now. Our children's futures depend on it. If we can prevent further erosion of their cognitive and emotional health, we owe it to them to act. Visit RF Safe to learn more.